afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this GIMS event to celebrate the publication of Phil Armstrong's biography of Warren Mosler, Under the Bonnet. We're really delighted to have Warren with us today and look forward to hearing from him a little later. A week or so ago, Deborah Harrington, a founding member of GIMS, posted a memory on Facebook, reminding me of where the seeds of GIMS were sown. Although I seem to remember that Deborah did most of the work, we had collaborated on an event entitled Reframing the Debate, Economics for a Progressive Politics. We could not believe our luck when Bill Mitchell, who was in the audience, was in London at the time, agreed to speak at the event. It drew a large audience. Then, after an event in 2017, at which Bill presented his just published co-authored book, Reclaiming the State, followed later by a meeting in London at UCL Gower Street, a small group of us began to feel that the time had come for just talking about M&T was over, and that we needed to formulate something real and concrete, more than just a talking shop. Sarah, Claire, Deborah, Patricia, Jessica and I set up a group out of which the Gower Initiative for Modern Money Studies was born and launched in October 2018. Deborah reminded me in that same post of our enthusiasm to challenge the narratives that prevailed and our shared desire to make a difference. Since that time, and as Deborah also reminded me, the world has irrevocably changed, and we have all changed in the face of it. Our enthusiasm, while still there, has turned into a quiet determination to keep plugging away in whatever way we can. To remember that whilst our objectives were to challenge the household budget narratives of the state finances, our primary aim was to show that the technical explanations, although exceedingly important, were secondary to discussing what they actually mean for public policy. To demonstrate that all spending derives from political choices about how wealth and real resources are distributed and who benefits, and that the limits are never money but actual resources. To challenge the notion, very much in the news of late, that the public finances must be restored to balance, that the public services and social security payments are unaffordable until the god of growth, any old growth, delivers the taxes to pay for it. We would like to think that GIMS began an important public conversation that has sowed the seeds for an informed public debate. However, whilst GIMS has primarily focused on the problems faced at home in the UK, it is clear that we can no longer view the challenge as purely a domestic one. We do not live in splendid isolation. We are part of a connected world, and there is much more at stake. If we thought things couldn't get worse than they already were, Gramsci's monsters are now out of the shadows and full view. At the same time, great shifts in the balance of power are taking place as a multi-nodal world is slowly forming. BRICS and the global South nations are challenging the neoliberal status quo and the colonial theft and exploitation the West has lived off for decades, well actually not decades, for centuries. The promotion of national sovereignty, not of the flag-waving sort, but rather the idea that countries should be able to serve their own domestic interests while at the same time work cooperatively with their neighbours. And then the real work that many like Fidel Cabood are undertaking to bring about an understanding of how government spends, what the real limitations to spending are, and how countries can be supported to set their own path towards real independence, prosperity, and national resilience in the face of a changing world. We are living in a time of global uncertainty and instability, while our leaders fan the flames of endless wars in their great game for power and influence. The climate crisis in that time has been put on the back burner. Governments tell us that on the one hand, saving the planet and addressing the key challenges of our time is unaffordable, while at the same time committing to billions in spending for war and bloodshed. The warfare, not welfare model of government spending being promoted in Brussels and Downing Street. It is these contradictions that are slowly but surely raising questions. Decades ago, Tony Benn expressed it thus: if we can find the money to kill people, we can find the money to help people. He may not have been MMT, but he understood the contradictions and what was possible. This is the time to expose the deceits that serve political objectives, that have nothing to do with serving public purpose. That the core of the argument is not about money in itself. It is about the political decisions taken by governments about how real resources and wealth are distributed and the beneficiaries of those spending and policy decisions. Questions about who governments are serving. Questions about a political system which promotes a never-ending revolving door designed to keep the status quo in place. As a parent of two boys, now in their late 40s, I could never have imagined what sort of world was coming. But it seems to emphasise the reasons why we started GIMS. Our enthusiasm may not be what it was, but we keep going because we care about the future. We care about generations to come, our children, our grandchildren, those who will inherit either a mess or a better world. We're only a small organisation, and frankly, we can only do what we can do. But as such, GIMS aims to remain committed to contributing through its website and social media to playing a small part in creating a socially just world that puts people before profits and seeks to deliver a livable and kinder future for all. Thank you so much for listening.
Time for the glasses. Right, thanks everyone for coming. The plans today changed slightly because we were on the train and my son sent me a message saying he just proposed to his girlfriend. So if you look behind, you want to stand up there, sorry. There we are. I was like, you know, I've done the most important thing. Hi, congratulations. I'll never forget this day. And probably you guys won't, I hope, but there we go. So thanks for coming, Johnny and Gemma, particularly on this day. Thanks to my wife, long-suffering MMT widow. And then my wife has a sister, Kathy, you'll see next to her there. And there's probably not many people who are probably greater MMT widows than us, but we have, of course, the MMT widow, who's heard more and knows more about MMT than anyone else, probably, including me. And so thanks for coming, Elizabeth, that's great. And many thanks for everybody else, some of these familiar faces that have come down with us today. I want to thank Mark there, you can see at the front. He designed the cover. He also told me the first few pages were really boring and I'd better change my style or nobody will buy it, and he was right. So if you like it now, Mark takes the credit. If you don't like it, it's all my fault. All right, so he's a nice guy. Neil's come obviously to do a talk. We both found that we both use the same bag and we've got the same phone, so it's a little bit worrying, the Armstrong Wilson show, but he's following me very soon, so thanks everyone for coming. And I'm going through my list. There's a chap called Steve Lawton who'll be watching this. He's really helped me a lot, read through all the various drafts and things like that. Carlos, I think, is going to publish one of his books maybe, and if so, I'll be reading his drafts, so that's where I kind of repay that. Obviously, I'm going to come on to Warren because I'm going to say about 5 years ago I was on a Zoom call asking him technicalities about, Fed operations, and then he just there on the screen, Elizabeth was calling him for his tea, as we call it here, and I said, has anyone ever written your biography, Warren? And he laughed, as he does, and goes, no, so if you don't get a better offer, I'll do it. And then I started to go on, like I do sometimes, don't I, Johnny? Talk too much. And Warren goes, don't keep talking, you got the job. Only later did I know that he knows Robert Skidelsky, the greatest biography of the 20th, as a mate of it, and he's hired me like a school teacher from York. Anyway, I've done my best. And then Warren proceeded to introduce me to all the people that he knew from his past, like brother, sister, old school friends, his lead Mosler car driver, Martin, there, is pretending not to be listening. Now, Martin knows about cars, and I'm going to ask Martin to come down in a moment after Carlos. I'm just going to have a couple of words after me then Martin's going to pop down, because this biography is not just about Warren's life in changing the world of economics, which he has. He's also done some spectacular car stuff, and I hope Martin will give you a few tales. It won't necessarily be kind, but I mean, he's a car driver, he's a tough guy, so we'll see. I don't preempt Martin. I'd like to thank all the people, if they're watching this, the interviewees that give up their time to help me write the book. Carlos, I couldn't have done it without you publishing it. And also the whole MMT community who kind of put up with me talking about stuff over the years. And of course, I've got to finish by talking about GIMS. I mean, I'm not going to shed a tear or anything embarrassing, but it's just so it's like coming home, when you come up the stairs and see the GIMS. For those of you who spent half the morning wandering around London trying to find it, and suddenly you see the GIMS banner, you think you're home. The three ladies have kind of, come out of a little bit of a hiatus for this, and I'm massively grateful for them doing that. I work for them, I'm an associate at GIMS, and I wear that badge with pride, so without GIMS I couldn't have done this, and so thanks then to my family and to GIMS in particular, and for everyone who's here. I'm now going to hand over to Carlos, the publisher, and the books will be available, £15 or £20, depending how wealthy you're spending, and then I'll try and sign them at some point, and also Warren will be able to sign them as well. So thanks for coming, and I'll hand you over to Carlos, and then it'll be Martin. He's just preparing his speech now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Phil. I'm going to keep it short. I am Carlos from Lola Books. I have published the book, and I am very proud to be the publisher of Warren Mosler, with whom I have traveled the world in several continents, really, and we have known each other for so long. And I really think this is an excellent work by Phil, because I always compare the work of Warren with the big thinkers of our time. In only one page of a conversation with Phil, you have condensed more knowledge than in several volumes of empty theory that nowadays we find in economics. So I really think that Warren Mosler is one of the brightest thinkers that we of our generation, and for me, I'm really proud to have published him in Spanish, in German, and now in English language through the work of Phil. And I also would like to thank to Gims. I am really proud to be friends with Prue and with the other members of Gims. I really think that everybody in Britain should support Gims, like Prue has said, because I really have the feeling that Gims reflects the best part of the British society. And I am also very proud of being a friend of Gims and of Prue and the rest of the crew. So I invite everybody to reading this book, because we are going to find not only the normal Warren Mosler text, but we are also going to find the way he lived, the way he thinks, and the way and all the problems and all the successes that he has that he had during his life, and that really helps to understand the whole work of Warren, because in the way he lives we can also find the way he thinks and the way he comes up with his wonderful ideas. So I really hope that everybody enjoys this book, and I thank you very much again for all your efforts, and thank you, Warren.
Just to say to everybody, coffee and cake will be in the basement around about 2 o'clock, depending on
how long I
how long you take it.
Thank you. Just to say, Martin is Mr. Mosler in the cars, and his interview was extremely interesting and formative for me. That's the last of the serious stuff. Here he is.
Thanks for dropping me in the deep and brown.
You're welcome, Martin.
Thanks, Meg. Well, I think there's probably 2 non-academics here, maybe a few, but me and Elizabeth and everyone else has obviously got brains the size of a planet. So I've got nothing to do with MMT. I've been listening to it for 20 odd years. I still don't understand it. Warren bounces babies, grandchildren on his knees and explains the MMT. I focus on it and I still don't get it. So I'll leave it to you guys. What I do know about Warren is he's a car nut. He used to race back in the day a Volkswagen Rabbit, or as we used to call it, a Golf GTI, the boxy thing. And his manic obsession with cars meant that eventually he started manufacturing cars in Palm Beach and West Palm Beach, and he started. Pardon?
Riviera Beach.
Riviera Beach.
Under Riviera.
Riviera Beach. Yeah, something to do with Blue Heron Drive. And he started off with cars that were completely different to everybody else's. It was one of the very first Kevlar fiberglass composite car, full body, full chassis, with just a couple of subframes on, with a Dodge turbocharged engine in the back. And he built this car. It rated in the top 10 ugliest cars in the world, which I'm sure Warren's going to throw darts at me for. But top three. But bizarrely now is Warren gave me one of these cars, and it sits in my house in St Ives, Cambridge, and when I take it out, young people love it because it's so different. But in its day, it won multiple 24-hour races, and every time it won, they threw more weight at the car and tried to slow it down, and then it won again. 3 24-hour races in a row it won annually at the Nelson Ledgers, until eventually they just banned him outright and said no more Moslers. Which pretty much sums up Warren and my racing career with later on with his next developed car, which was called the MT900, and on page 129 in the book there's a beautiful picture that I first saw in 2002. Basically, as somebody had told me about this car. I was racing in British GT, and these people hadn't been able to get to look at this car because they were due to fly on September the 11th. And so they didn't do that, and they ended up buying a car from me. As soon as they left the workshop, I got on the internet and found this car, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was so beautiful, and it had a Corvette engine. And it was like a sci-fi car, but it was underneath, it was, you know, like a normal race, well, it was built as a race car. And it was what I needed. And so within 3 days I'd flown out and met his mechanics at a racetrack, and then I flew down to Riviera Beach, and I sort of think we sort of met, but it was a little bit of a bounce off each other, but we actually bonded over a swear word. And which I'm not going to say.
You spell it.
But I was trying to buy this race car from Mosler Automotive, and I was dealing with a very tough American lawyer, one of Warren's best friends, and he was pretty mean. And I thought we'd done a deal, and we got back to England, and we were emailing, and he was disagreeing with how much I could buy an alternative car for him. It was getting quite feisty. And then eventually I just emailed him, and I made sure that Warren was copied in, and I said, look, Alan, it would just be a lot easier if you told me to F off. 3 minutes after that email, I got an email from Warren saying, Martin, we'd love to do business with you. And that's Warren. He sees things in people that most people don't see. I'm quite an acerbic character, but he saw something in me, and ultimately, we ended up winning multiple 24-hour races with that car. We went around the world. We went to Bathurst. Warren came, and Elizabeth, to the 24 hours of Bathurst. We won at Silverstone 24 hours. We won Mosler, won at Daytona 24 hours. We won the British GT Championship. And he kept me in employment, and 20 odd people in England, in fact more like 40 people, because we ended up building race cars and road cars in England, and this all came out of the imagination of Warren. So I find it quite fitting that the book is actually called Under the Bonnet, because most of you probably don't realise that his real passion is not really the economics, it's really the cars. But if he hadn't done the cars, he'd be a lot wealthier than he is now, because I think every car cost him a small fortune because they were very expensive, and we didn't sell them for a lot. But just to close, Warren, congratulations on your book. He's the most philanthropic, kind person that is always right. And on that note, thank you very much.
Over to Warren.
I just want you to know that I had met and knew Robert Skidelsky, Sir Robert Skidelsky.
Lord.
And back when he used to attend some post-Keynesian conferences. And he does not hold a candle to put them in an economics discussion, and it's night and day, not even close. But he's a very nice guy, and he's brilliant. But then there's Phil Armstrong. Okay, they haven't told me what I'm supposed to talk about. But I do want to thank all the organizers, and not just for this event, but for everything that's led up to it over the years, right up to the publisher. And it was just an overwhelming experience to go through with Phil calling up people I've known, I haven't heard from or seen in 30, 40 years, and listening to their stories and all the memories it brought back. A lot of it I still don't remember as having happened, but a lot of it I did, and to just get, it kind of relights those days, rekindles what was going on in the atmosphere back in the early days when I first was working at the Savings Bank of Manchester, then Bankers at Beige, Bankers Trust in New York, and then William Blair in Chicago. And he just went through talking to those people, and so many things came back that happened, and it was just a fantastic experience. I mean, I got more out of it, I think, watching the process than you can imagine anybody. I just very appreciative that it happened. I'm glad I lived long enough to see it happen. 76 this year, what you call in the fourth quarter. And we've got people that have taken up the torch who are substantially younger and more vital, like Neil here. Fortunately, that have the implicit understanding of what it is. So I know this is just the beginning of something that's going to be there, pestering the authorities for a very long time until they get it right, which they will, And we can see it coming around. Two very, I guess the word important or critical or interesting things, changes happened in the last 2 weeks. First, I see this article on China Banking News from an economist named Xu Gao. He's a lead economist at the Bank of China. There's like 2 sections to it. One's pension and one's operations, but he's the head economist at one of them. And there's been an ongoing discussion inside China about their public debt because it's considered to be enormous, and everything you hear about our public debts and what should be done about it. And there's the one school of thought, call it the Wall Street School, the mainstream economic school, that something has to be done about it. It's a ticking time bomb. It's going to bring the Chinese dynasty crashing down. And then there's the other side, which is the MMT side, as you said, which says that the debt, the number is not a problem. It's just offsetting operating factors, whatever it is. And they need to just focus on the real economy and flows of the economy, and the number itself, the debt, is just an economy residual. It's not something that's going to make any difference. And he comes down, directly. He's on the MMT side. He says, look, the MMT side is right. All these other people are wrong. Now, what's important about that is it's coming from the top down, saying the MMT side is right and all you other economists are wrong. It's coming from the top, arguably the top economist in the world, because China is 1.4 billion people, and they have very large economy, and their growth rates have been far exceeding the rest of the world. And they've been looked up to, and so to come from the top down is not anything we've seen. This whole MMT movement has been grassroots. It's all come from the bottom up. It started off as just one, which was me. It wasn't MMT. And then it was my partners in my firm. We got it. And then there were other clients, and suddenly it's 8. And then 3 years later, I send this, there's a post-Keynesian discussion group on the internet back then, which was a new thing. And in January, I think, of '96, I sent them something explaining what would be very familiar to all of you, just a short paragraph. The government, money comes from the government, they spend for it. And that would introduce it to the academic world. Then suddenly there's 10 or 12 or 15, and it starts, they're teaching it, and it spreads, and it's 20, 130 years later, it's, I don't know how many it is today, maybe 1 million or 300,000, it's big numbers of people who are exposed to it. If you do a search for Jerome Powell, Federal Reserve Chief, modern monetary theory, there'll be a quote from him that says, MMT is wrong, something, but he's talked about it. Lagarde, they've talked about it at the ECB, and all the way up, any world leader has talked about it. So it did that from people like yourselves from all different walks of life, literally, a lot of them were, most of them had nothing to do with the financial sector, but recognized something, and it spread around, and it came up. Now, there have been a lot of grassroots movements in the world, but not for monetary operations. Who ever heard of that? Who would think, that Sarah up there would become an activist in monetary operations? So maybe, save the whales, and I was just in Wales, they seemed okay, but, okay, but, or something for the environment. But gee, the central bank has to credit accounts before they debit them. How are people, non-technical people out there pushing this to their leadership? Well, they recognize the value, right? That it's affecting their lives. They're the ones, the people they know and the world they live in is being adversely affected. Their other causes are being adversely affected by this. But it's been enough, for whatever reason, to go global. And probably every country in the world I'm getting, MMT stuff on the way up. And totally improbable. But it was done without any celebrity. There's not a single celebrity that's been involved. There hasn't been a single celebrity involved in propagating this throughout the world the way it's done. It's all come from the bottom up. Suddenly, for the first time ever, somebody at the very top it's now coming down from the top. And that's a massive shift. What do you call it? Tectonic plates moving or something like that?
It's a paradigm shift.
Paradigm shift, right. And that comes from somebody who does have a paradigm, right? And we've got this, that is a sign of a paradigm shift. Now a second thing happened a week later of slightly lesser prominence and consequence, but I've been talking about trade. And I've been saying that we've had another tectonic plates are now moving in trade with what Trump has done. There's been a major shift. And what's happened is the US has been the big importer in the world for $1.5 trillion net, imports every year. And how did we get to be there? And there are people who say, well, it's because the dollar is the reserve currency. And it's all based on the value, the investment value of the dollar. It's a safe asset. They're recycling, exporters sell to the US, they have dollars, and it gets recycled, and there's petrodollars that the Saudis do this with, and there are the interest rates in the US, and the US is strong military. They go into all these, so it's secure, they go all these investment reasons that the dollar is where it is and what it's been. And that borders on total nonsense, okay? Even if it is true, it only explains a very small fraction of why the US is importing that much in goods and services on a net basis every year, okay? The real reason is something I started to talk about before, is that nobody can decide to net import anything, okay, unless somebody else decides to hold your currency. And people might decide to hold the US currency for those reasons, and it might cause us to be a net importer, but it would be very small. There's been a much larger reason that the global exporters have decided to hold US dollars. They've been doing this for 50, 60 years. And the reason is the political forces inside China, inside the UK, are such that they've got this narrative that controls, they control the narrative that export-led growth is a good thing. And you hear that all the time. Okay, we've got a trade surplus and good job, and oh, we have a trade deficit, and what are we going to do to change it? Exporting is like the holy grail of economics and growth. And China, with all their exports, is the largest growing country, fastest growing country in the world. And if you want to grow, you emerging market countries, you have to be net exporters. And, okay, so export-led growth has taken over. Now, we all know, but I'll explain it anyway, that if exports are a real cost, you got to look at your real wealth. Okay, and I'll just use a smaller table. Your real wealth can be thought of as your pile of stuff. And everything you produce domestically when you go to work, all your goods and services, produces this pile of stuff, which includes educational services and things that you produce in factories and food that you grow. It's all your pile of stuff that you produce by working. And of course, if you have more people working, your pile gets larger, so that's good. So we all want to get to full employment, which we've been talking about, because now you're maximizing your pile of stuff. In unemployment, your pile is deficient. The real loss from not having everybody working is larger than all the losses from all the wars combined in the history of man. That's how large the losses are from unemployment. So you really want to get there. Okay. Now, imports, when you bring something in, it makes your pile larger. That's good. You have more stuff. Exports makes your pile smaller. You have less stuff. So to give you another way of understanding that, if you were to, exports are so good, if you were to export everything and not import anything, what happens? Okay, everybody dies. All your food's been exported, all your shelter, all your clothing, you've been working, everything you have, you've exported. You got a credit to some central bank account, but you have nothing, you're dead. Right? Now, let's say you import everything and you don't export anything. Okay, well, for as long as you can make it last, you don't have to work. You've got everything. You've got UBI in real terms. Everybody gets all this free stuff, and somebody else has a credit in your central bank, whatever. Maybe whatever that means. It's a tax credit. But if you're just importing and you don't have to export anything, you're living high. Okay, you're thriving. But if you're exporting everything, not importing anything, you're dead. Now, we live somewhere in between, but it's just another way to understand, okay, that the reason you send things out is because you want to get something in return. You don't do it just for the sake of sending something out. If that was the case, you might as well just send it out in the ocean and let it sink, because you're not going to get anything in return anyway, right? So tying that back to what I was saying before, we've got these countries who believe that exports per se are winning, okay? And you've got China. The other example I used to give is if General MacArthur had gone into Japan, he did go to Japan, he was in Japan, winning general on the US side, at the end of World War II. If he had said to the Japanese, look, you lost the war, okay, you have to send us 2 million cars a year, that's war reparations, and we're not going to send you anything, okay? War reparations mean the loser sends things to the winner, okay? That's because it's good to get things, right? If you win the war, the winner doesn't send things to the loser, it's the other way around. Right? So if General MacArthur got in, like Caesar when he went to Gaul, you're going to send us food and we're not going to send you anything. Right? If he had gone into Japan and said, you're going to send us 2 million cars a year, they said, you can't do that to those poor people. They lost the war, they're bombed out, they have nothing, you'd be exploiting them, okay? We tried that with Germany at the end of World War I, Treaty of Versailles. You have to send something. Don't do that, okay? So they didn't do that. Okay, instead we did what we did, and what happened for the next 75 years? Japan sent us 2 million cars a year, and we sent them nothing. Okay, that was the biggest case of war reparations in the history of the world, apart from all the stuff Germany sent us from that. Okay, the war reparations that we got from World War II were larger than anything. And the ones sending us the war reparations, the cars, Japan sending us 2 million cars a year, they thought they were winning the trade war. Okay, and we thought we were losing. And I remember President Clinton had Mickey Cantor, Trade Secretary in Japan, negotiating with them to try and end this trade surplus and our trade deficit. And he was going to put tariffs on it, just like Trump, same thing. This is bipartisan. And they had this whole big thing, and we didn't, whatever happened, and it didn't work out, and they got criticized politically, and Japan kept sending us stuff. The first president to finally succeed in stopping these war reparations that we've been getting is President Trump, okay? It's the largest Pyrrhic victory in the history of the world. This is just complete madness. And we're going through it now in real time, okay? And what's happened is, what is the technique they used, and Japan used, to export to us? They bought US dollars. And what does that do? It makes their currency go down and our currency go up. So that for us, because we have dollars that they're buying, driving the price up, Japanese cars look cheap. And for Japan, every American cars look expensive. We're not going to buy those. Okay? And so the Bank of Japan, with what they've done in the currency, has caused their people, their real standard of living to drop. Okay, the real wages are lower because of the exchange rate. They can't afford the rest of the world stuff. Ours is higher. Our real wages are that much higher because of the exchange rate. We can buy all these imports. And the evidence is last year, for last quarter, our imports were running at positive. Net imports $1.5 trillion a year, about 140 billion a month, 130 billion a month. Okay, this has been going on for really since World War II, but in big time the last 50 or 60 years. When Trump 1 came along, he put 10% tariffs on. So how did they respond? They bought more dollars. They depressed their real wages 10% more. They were still competitive. We still were able to afford their stuff and pay the tariffs. Okay, our real terms of trade didn't get hurt. Okay, they took a hit and for that amount. So the economists, the analysts looked at it and said, oh, we see tariffs cause the dollar to go up. But the tariffs didn't cause the dollar to go up. It was their policy response to buy more dollars to make it go up in order to depress their own wages and their own standard of living so that we could keep buying their stuff. Now, who wins in that? The car exporters wins. Toyota, Mitsubishi, Chinese car exporters win. But the rest of their population loses. But the large exporters have political control. They're consolidated, they have a lot of people, they have influence, they influence the Communist Party, they influence the parties in power in Japan. Right? And so the exporters influence the UK policy. And so when you're driving exports, you have policies that drive exports, it's at the expense of your own wages, so you can't afford our stuff, but we can afford your stuff. And if you look at foreign exchange reserves for the United Kingdom, they've been going up. Now, it hasn't gone to the point of a trade surplus yet, but it's kept the deficit a lot lower than it would have been. Okay, it's worked against you. All you have to do is look at your accumulation of foreign exchange reserves. If they're buying these reserves, your currency is being pushed down to keep your wages down, to keep your exporters profitable, whether they know it or not. And it's both sides of the political spectrum think this is a good thing. Okay, so Trump this time says, okay, I had tariffs last time, but you guys got around it. You're not going to take advantage of me again. We're going to make sure that we cut off these imports we're getting, okay? We're going to stop these war reparations you're sending us. You're taking advantage of us by, China, you're evil. You're not charging us enough for your cars. Canada, you're evil. You're not charging us enough for lumber. Trump put tariffs on lumber because they were evil, not charging us enough. Biden comes in, he doubles the tariff on lumber because they still weren't charging us enough. I mean, who would think that the person not charging you enough is evil, right? But that's the way the numbers have caused these people to think. They're the way they view the numbers. And it's I know it's nuts. I've watched it all my life. So anyway, so now Trump too comes in. This is not going to happen. 50% tariffs, 200% on pharmaceuticals, whatever. And we don't want you manipulating your currencies anymore. Okay? But we don't want you going off the dollar, whatever that means. There is no going on or off the dollar. So he talks out of both sides of his mouth. And he's made it clear that if they figure out a way to import even with what he's doing, he's going to do something else. Okay? I think that has ended this strategy they had of export-led growth. Yeah, their exporters were in control, but they're not anymore because that doesn't work anymore. This nutcase that the United States has is not going to allow this to continue. If we do something, we're not going to make a big investment in something because he's going to cut it off. It's not worth the investment, setting up supply chains and all that. We're not going to do this anymore. We have to export to other countries. We have to increase domestic consumption of all things, right? So China's keeping their 5% growth rate, and as their exports to the US fall off, okay, their domestic consumption is going up. Their exports to other countries are going up. And their imports from other countries are going up. So things are happening, and the United States is being left off to the side. And they are no longer buying dollars to support the old system of export-led growth in the US, which means the dollar returns to where it would have been if they hadn't been doing this for 50 years. Now, there are other factors around. It's not just the amount of dollars, there's prices and relative values and all kinds of things that go into wages, but that's just an important factor of it. And so you will see the US dollar is already down 10 or 12%, in the first half of this year. And they're all talking about interest rates, the Fed, and confidence. It's got nothing to do with it. These guys are not buying it. They're not selling, but they're not actively supporting the dollar to target the US for exports. Okay, and so the prices of imports, even without the tariffs, are going up because they're not keeping them down. They're not keeping their own wages down. Their real wages are going up. The Chinese yuan has actually gone up more than 10%. It's leading the charge. And they're buying other currencies instead of dollars, and so those currencies are doing better against the dollar also. And how far will the dollar go? How far will this adjustment go? Until the US can't afford to buy imports anymore. And so our trade deficit will go back to where it would have been, which is pretty close to zero, like where any deficit would be, if you didn't have this currency manipulation, currency intervention to cause it to be where it is. It won't be exactly there, but it won't be gaping up or gaping down like what's the differential. What does this mean for the US? Our consumers used to buy everything they produced domestically, their pile of stuff, plus $1.5 trillion net imports. That's a lot of stuff, more than that $1.5 trillion is not going to be there anymore. It's like a crop failure. It's called a negative supply shock. It's gone. Okay. Instead, that's going to go to somebody else in the world. Everybody else is going to benefit from this. Okay, except the exporters, but that's okay. The beneficiaries are 95%. The exporters are 5%. At the macro level, it helps the rest of the world enormously, and it's a huge opportunity for the rest of the world, including the UK. If you understood it, and we're in a position to take advantage of it, which isn't hard, but you have to know what you're doing. Okay, it's not complicated or anything. You don't need to know math or science or anything, but you do have to know what you're doing. And you have to know how the checks clear in the Bank of England. And that's a steep hurdle to get over, so it may not be. But for the United States, this is going to be devastating, okay? Because that 3 or 4% of GDP, that $1.5 trillion, is a much higher percentage of somebody's discretionary income, because a lot of your income goes to things, that you have, they're kind of automatic. It's the money you have left over after tax and everything else that you're spending. Your standard of living in the US on average is going to be down 20 or 30%, because all this stuff that you used to buy is going to be too expensive. We can't make it domestic. They say, well, we'll just make the stuff domestically. We're going to bring that back home. Well, we're already at what they consider full employment. It's 4% unemployment. Do I consider that full employment? Not particularly. I'd like to see 2, but we consider it full employment to the point where the Fed's saying we have to keep interest rates high because unemployment's so low. So politically, we're at full employment when they decide policy. Okay, when you're at full employment, you can't add to your output. The biggest your pile can get is the amount as large as it is with everybody working. If suddenly we need to produce something that's being produced in China, maybe more cars, I don't know, it means we're going to have fewer healthcare workers or fewer something else. It's a trade-off. Your output is based on how many people are working, what you can produce, plus any productivity growth, which is maybe 1% a year or something. It's something that's not 0. And our population is going down because we're deporting all our workers. This is like nuts. So we've got a declining, all of a sudden we're in full employment. We haven't been getting any new jobs. We used to get 200,000 to 300,000 new jobs every month, and the economy was growing. And now all of a sudden it's like we're getting 25,000, and unemployment didn't go up. How'd that happen? Because people are gone. And they're getting older. So we're losing it from both ends. And everybody thinks we're winning. The government thinks, it's like, no, this is not winning, this is losing. Well, now we're finally winning the trade war. We don't have a deficit. No, we're losing. And you're going to see the US settle back to consumption levels. And what you look for now, they say, our output will still have full employment, but your paycheck's not going to be buying anything anymore. Okay, so, and anyway, I don't know if you got me up here to talk about this. Let's shift gears a little bit. The car that Martin first got, which it first hit the racetrack in 25 years ago, before his oldest son was 1 year old, his youngest son hadn't been born yet. Now, 25 years later, in the same car, those two boys are taking like first and second to get their car on the pole, which means the fastest class in the field, recently in a GT3 class, against the latest from Porsche and all the other sports car manufacturers who are 6 generations on. And they're still beating those cars from 20 years ago. Okay? Well, you know, what haven't those people learned about making cars? Well, for one thing, the new cars that they're coming out with that are finally actually running neck and neck. And for 25 years, they would add weight, put restrictors on our engine so we couldn't run with it. Now they're kind of caught up, so it's more of an even race, you know. But they also now look exactly like, you know, our cars. But it's 25 years on, and so it's a real thrill to see the second generation driving the original pieces of stuff we made and being competitive with the latest and greatest from all the factories, workers out there. The boat design I did, which was designed so that people could go from St. Croix to St. Thomas without getting seasick. And that doesn't mean everybody, but most people who get seasick don't. But it's still out there after 8 years doing that. And no one has copied the design, which is a lot like what's happened in modern monetary theory. And it took 25 years for them to catch up in the car side. And that's the same kind of thing we're up against. I guess the same thing's going to happen on the boat side. And the theory of the boat, the idea of the boat was I was driving around in a boat, going over the waves, and going like, okay, the boat's it comes to a wave, it comes up, the whole boat goes over, it pitches down, then it goes back up, and then the whole thing pitches down, and it accelerates down, and accelerates up. Like, what's going on here? And it dawned on me that this is the exact same thing that happens in a car. If you have a very short wheelbase car, a small car, where the front and back wheels are close near each other, a short car, the front goes up at a pretty steep angle if you hit a bump, then it goes over and the back goes down. But if you have a bus where the front and back wheels are really far apart, the front of the bus goes up, the bus is not nearly as tilted as that little car would be. You raise the front of a small car by a foot, you're at a pretty good angle. You raise the front of a bus by a foot, you don't even notice it, right? That's the wheelbase. The short one, the same bump is a big motion. The long one, the same bump is a smaller motion. So a boat is like a very short wheelbase car. In fact, it's a zero wheelbase, like a bulldozer or something that only has 2 treads, or a tank, army tanks. When you go over a bump, the whole thing has to go over. It falls down and crashes, pitches, and does exactly what a boat does. So I said, okay, well, why don't we build a long wheelbase boat? And there's a picture of it in the book. So that the front will go up, but just a little bit because it's way out in front. The angle of the boat won't be so bad. And then it'll come down. The whole boat doesn't have to go over the bump, just like your whole car, the whole bus doesn't go over the bump, just the front wheels. Then a little bit later, the back wheels. And so the boat, there's 2 holes way out in front, they go up and over the wave. Then a little while later, the wave hits the back ones, and they go up and down. So it's articulating like a bus going down a bumpy road, instead of like something that has to jump and go over the hole. Nothing complicated, no moving parts, right? And the boat company wouldn't build it for 2 years because they didn't think it would work. They thought they'd have reputational damage. I offered, Martin talked to them, right? And tell me if I'm wrong. So I offered to sign a release saying that if it doesn't work, I take full responsibility and all. They wouldn't do that. So I had to build these small ones, like 15 feet, with the 4 hulls, outboard motors. It took a while because we're in a small island to get people to do anything. That we had quality people, but it just takes 2 guys with foreign resident stuff a lot longer than if you have 20 people doing something. And it worked. And they went out on this and they said, oh yeah, now we understand how it works. We get it. You know, we think your boat will work. It's like, thanks. So they built it, and they sent it to they got a Coast Guard approved, which was also very difficult. The Coast Guard didn't think it was going to work either. And it's been out there 8 years without any damage. And all the other boats, after about a year, need to be re-welded and rebuilt. Because there's another very important thing about a car with a long wheelbase. If you get a flat tire, you jack up the front wheel, the cars, to repair the front wheel, you're not going to bend the frame because you're jacking the car up at the middle, at the wheel, so it just kind of tilts the whole thing. It's not putting a lot of stress on the frame or the back wheel. But if you jack up a car in the middle between the wheels so that both ends are hanging over it, you can bend the frame. You're putting a lot of stress on that frame in the car. Okay, that's what happens to boats. Because when they go over a wave, at one point the wave's in the middle of the boat and they're trying to break the boat in half, its own weight. And you'll see tankers abandoned and broken in half in the ocean if you look it up online. After a certain number of time, they break themselves in half. And all these boats that have been going across carrying passengers and cargo, after a certain period of time, the whole frame is flexing and bending and needs all kinds of structural repairs in it. Well, this boat, first a wave lifts up the front, it's not stressing the frame. And then it lifts up the back, it's not stressing the frame. It's been out there in waves that are 4 to 6 feet high regularly, going across this 2-hour run and back, totally unstressed, like the frame on a bicycle or the frame on a normal car, because it has a long wheelbase. Okay. So, Martin, is there anything else in that book I need to cover? I've got cars, I've got MMT, trade. If anybody asks you about the public debt, I find the easiest thing to say is, look, everybody knows the movie theater, the football stadium, they don't collect the ticket first and then sell it. They sell the ticket first and then collect it. And likewise, the funds to pay taxes, to buy government bonds come from the government through its agents, Bank of England and so forth. These are all agents of government. They are actually spending the money first and then collecting it. Okay. And so what is the public debt in the US? We spent $7 trillion last year, but we spent it first. It's already been spent. We then deleted $5 trillion from people's accounts to pay taxes from money that was already spent. We didn't tax to get the money to spend. It was already, you keep repeating, already spent. Okay. That left $2 trillion. That was already spent. We then sell bonds that people can buy with that $2 trillion that's already been spent. Whether they buy the bonds or not, it's too late. The money's already been spent. We really don't care. If they want to keep their money in a checking account without interest, or they want to buy bonds with higher interest, it's their choice. It doesn't matter to a government that's already spent. And when they buy bonds, what are the bonds? They're just a different account at the Bank of England for the same money. It's either a cash account or it's in a securities account. And how do we pay back the bonds? Well, first of all, they already are the money. A bond is money. It's just getting money with interest. But how do we pay it back? We just move it back into the cash account. They debit one and credit the other. This is money that's already been spent and it's floating around out there. Yeah.
Just thinking that one of my favourites is the old Italian bond story.
Oh, okay.
Particularly with the Keynes lookalike.
Yeah.
You know, that's awesome.
But the last thing about the deficit spending, why is the deficit so high? What's the answer? There can't be 1 penny of deficit spending unless there's a saver out there who wants to save. And the more the savers, the higher the deficit. It can't happen. Okay? Because if nobody wants to save it, it means you can't buy anything. Because if you're going to buy something, what are they going to do with that money? Okay, this is deficit spending. There's no tax involved for this. If they're holding it, they're saving it. If they don't want to save it, they're going to try and buy something with it. They don't want to save it, they're going to try and buy something. Prices are just at infinity. You can't buy anything to begin with. You can't get it started just by spending something nobody wants to save.
What is the motivation for Bank of England to say to sell bonds? That's what I don't understand.
To sell bonds?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so the government's spent $7 trillion first, then deleted $5 trillion. Why does the government care about that other $2 trillion? Because under the gold standard, people with that money could cash it in and take your gold and you default. To eliminate that risk, you sell them a bond which says you can't have money your money can't be cashed in until your bond comes due. It's a 2-year bond in 2 years, a 10-year bond in 10 years. And there's some interest rate that'll cause you to, okay, I'll have a 10-year bond, I know I can't get my gold, but at 5%, I'll take that chance, okay? Now, the gold standard's been gone. There's no valid reason for the government to sell bonds anymore.
What has something to do with maintaining the overnight interest rate?
Huh?
I thought it was to do with the overnight interest rate.
Okay, yes, but it doesn't have to be a 30-year bond, it can be 1 day. You can just pay interest on the reserve. Yeah. Okay. Savings thing. So the debt is $36 trillion in the US. That's only because everybody wants to save, desperately wants to save $36 trillion. Why? It's government again. They've decided there's virtue in savings. So if you have money taken out of your paycheck to put in a pension fund, there's no tax on it until 30 years later when it comes due. And the interest has no tax on it. So that gets saved too. Okay? And so they've created all these tax advantage reasons to save money because they think you need savings to have money for investment, which is completely wrong. Who would have thought they'd get this wrong? But they do. Okay, and if you look at how much money is in pension funds, it's like the same 30 or 40 trillion, not to the penny, because there's insurance reserves and there's other savings. But it's, orders of magnitude. You can see what's going on here. You put money in your personal IRA, we're going to give you a tax advantage, no tax on that, income tax on that money until later. And you figure out how much you're saving. It's compelling. How do we know it's compelling? You all want to do it. Where does it come from? Any unspent income like that has to come from somebody spending more than their income, which in this case is the government. Deficit spending. So there is no deficit spending. You can't borrow to buy a house unless somebody wants to sell the house and save the money. If they all just want to spend whatever you borrow, the prices would just go to infinity and nobody would ever sell their house if the economy did somewhere in that economy want to save the money. So when there's private borrowing, which I always talk about, MMT doesn't understand private borrowing, yes, thank you, or public borrowing, it falls under, it's all deficit spending, public and private. None of it happens without savings. We create these savings. If we stop these tax advantage savings, the deficit spending would go away. It would have to go away. There'd be nothing to spend, and it wouldn't exist. Okay, it's an identity. So, back to
the Italian story.
Italian story. So, Maria Samuels, who I just saw a few weeks ago, worked at Harvard Management, along with Dave Middleman, who's not with us anymore. But we were observing back then that Italian bonds were paying 12% interest, roughly. And we could borrow lira to pay for them at 10%. So this is pretty easy money. You borrow at 10 in lira, you invest at 12, you make 2% in lira. But what if the lira goes down? Okay, you're still going to make a profit. It's just not going to be worth as many dollars, but it's still free profit. So if the lira drops 10%, instead of making, on a $100 million spread, if I borrow $100 million worth, invest $100 million, instead of making $2 million, I'll only make $1 million or whatever. But I'm going to make money. I'm not going to lose. As long as I can, borrow lira at 10 and invest lira at 12, I'm secure here. The problem is everybody thought the Italian bonds were going to default. And Rudy Dornbush was an MIT economist, had a stack of papers about Italy's certain default. Their debt to GDP was 124%, and their taxes were this, and it was unsustainable. Okay, this was in the 1990s. Right? And so nothing's new, right? This is what was going on. And so I'm there as a fund manager. I knew how the money worked and everything, but I'd never thought about this because I'd never seen this opportunity before. So I said, if I can come up with a good reason why Italy wasn't going to default, there's a lot of money to be made for my investors. This 2% spread can turn into a 5 or 10% annual return for investors, which, above and beyond the interest rate, which is a lot. And So I'm kicking it around, and I was talking to Tom Schulke, who was my research guy at the time. And it just dawned on me that, I said, Tom, if we buy Treasury securities from the Treasury, okay, or if we buy them from the Federal Reserve, it doesn't make any difference to us. The money goes to the same place, okay? We own the same thing, it's a security of the Fed. I said, if it doesn't make any difference to us, the only difference has to be how they account for it on their side of the ledger. There can't be any actual difference. But when we buy from the Treasury, supposedly we're funding the expenditures, they need that to spend. We buy from the Fed, to your point, they're doing that to hit their interest rate targets. One's monetary and one's fiscal. But it's got to be all the same thing. Otherwise, there's no difference to us. Okay? So if you have a company selling oil, we buy it. And there's two parts of the company. We buy it from one and we buy it from the other. It's got to be the same to that company. They've got less oil. Whether they call it A or B or put it in their left pocket or the right pocket, it's got to be all the same thing. So you think of the government as a black box, and we're just buying treasuries. And I said, and once you understand that, you realize it's all monetary. It's all about the fact that it has an effect on interest rates. It has nothing to do with funding expenditures. At which point, putting the last bit together, I understood that the government has to spend first before, that the money the government spends is the money that is used to buy securities. It's all the same thing. That first happened in 1977. I was at Bankers Trust in a trading meeting with Alan Rogers. We used to talk without moving his mouth. And I was a new guy there. I'd been hired from this little savings bank. And I'm at this trading meeting, and he goes, okay, there's $2 billion 2-year notes this week coming from the Treasury. Now there's like 200 billion. In fact, that was 2 billion. He says, where's all the money going to come from to buy those? I don't see how it's going to happen. They're going to have trouble selling 2 billion. There just isn't that much money in the system. And I say, Alan, it's the same money the Treasury is spending. They're going to be deficit spending 2 billion. That's why they sell 2 billion of Treasury securities. So when they spend the 2 billion, that 2 billion buys the Treasury security. It's debit credit. It's just a spreadsheet. It's the same number. And he looks at me for a couple seconds, then he turns to somebody else and asks the question, so where do you think the money's going to come from? It's like I was completely nuts. Now, how did I know this when nobody else on the desk understood it or could even fathom the answer? It made no sense to anybody. That was 1977. I don't know. I don't know why that made sense to me. I mean, I guess I'd been there watching auctions happen, watching Treasury spend, watching bonds buy, watching the Fed funds markets, and kind of understanding that when you add money to your account, the balance goes up. When you take it out, the balance goes down. They weren't noticing. There's not much else to it. But there's enough of a veil of numbers buzzing around where they just didn't occur to them. Maybe something they learned in school that they never looked at caused them to not see things clearly. I don't know. But they did. So that was 77. So now in 1992, 93, with this Italian thing, I already had that in my toolbox. And we realized that, and so I said, okay, let's check around. So I called the rating agency, Standard & Poor's, and said, have there ever been any defaults with local currency? Oh yeah, there have been lots of them. They sent me a list. So I started looking at them, there are half a dozen or more. There were things like Mexico or Argentina defaulted because the exchange rate, the inflation got so high that this 1 million pesos worth of bonds, which used to be worth something, was now less than a penny US. And so they just let it go and nobody cared about it. We classified that as a default. It's like, okay. In 1943, Japan defaulted to the United States on Japanese bonds in yen. Okay. Not surprising. Not because they didn't have the yen, but they were having like they were involved in a dispute of some sort. They decided not to do it. Right? A couple of the others were fixed exchange rates, and so they didn't actually default in their own currencies, like Standard & Poor's said. But there were no instances of ever this happened. But that's not enough, okay? But after understanding this with Tom, you know, I understood why they don't default, because they're spending first and then later and they're making the payments. Well, the important thing was for Italy to understand this, okay? Because I'll skip ahead to 1998 in Russia. Russia had a fixed exchange rate. It blew up. They did not have to default at that point. They could have just made the payments in rubles and not honored the exchange, the conversion, okay? But they didn't, because they didn't know how to operate their currency. Instead, everybody in the central bank walked out. They didn't even turn the lights off, okay? And rubles didn't clear for 3 months. Nobody could make payments. And then they went back to work and everybody got paid. Okay, so but back to 1993, we're ready to do this trade. We understand why you don't default in your currency, because it's just a reserve trade. It's just a monetary operation. You're selling the securities after the money's been spent, just to support your interest rates, not to fund expenditures. But the guys from Harvard said, well, let's go over and talk to people in Italy to make sure they know that, so they're not going to do something stupid, which is good plan. So I went over with Maurice. We met with Professor Luigi Spaventa, who was at the finance ministry. And we walk in and he's wearing this 3-piece suit. He looks like he's imitating Keynes or something. He's got the pipe, and he's got a his English was learned in UK, so he had this British accent. And I go, Professor Spaventa, I've got a rhetorical question, don't answer. Why is Italy selling all these BTPs, CCTs? Is it because you need the money to spend, or because you've already spent the lira, and if you don't issue these bonds, your interest rate will fall to 0 and not hit your 12% target? And he looks up and he doesn't say anything for a while. And all of a sudden, he says, no, they won't fall to 0, they'll fall to 0.5% because we pay a support rate on interest. You don't have to know what that means. But what it told me is that he knew what I was talking about. Okay, they were paying 0.5% interest on reserves. I didn't know that at the time. Nobody did, because it was so far off. It was like an old rule on the books or something. And it's like, okay, this guy gets it. And then he doesn't say anything else, but he jumps up, pulls out the pipe, and he starts going into this rage against the IMF. And they're making us act pro-cyclical. They're trying to get austerity, and they're saying we need to do this. You know, because you realize there's no default risk or anything. They don't have to do anything. And the IMF has been trying to get them to do what they do to all the emerging market countries today. And we were supposed to be in there for 20 minutes. And he starts calling in people from the other room. And the place had been total depression. I mean, it was gloomy when you went there. And he had that papers on him from Rudy Dornbusch saying that Italy was going to default. They all thought that. And the way his mood just changed, it's like he lit up like a Christmas tree. And he calls these people in from the other room and tells them they're all celebrating. They had this cappuccino machine, which is about this big, you know, with all these pipes and everything, and they start making us cappuccino. Marisa and I are like partying with him with his cappuccino. You know, 2 hours later we had to leave because we had another meeting. A week later, the announcements came out of Italy: no extraordinary measures will be taken, all payments will be met, because they didn't have a solvency problem. Okay, and we wound up being the largest holder of Italian bonds outside of Italy. They all just matured normally. There were no fireworks. So we made our 2%. Our investors made 10 or 12% on their money, and everybody was happy. And then after that is when I wrote Soft Currency Economics. Go ahead.
What I don't understand is when they've made that announcement, it's the equivalent of Mario Draghi saying we'll do whatever it takes to support the euro. Why did the spreads not close?
They did. They started to close, but not a lot, because all he said was they're going to make their payments. People didn't know if that was just talk, or they actually could make their payments. Yeah. Right. So, and they closed gradually. It took about 2 years to close all the way. But they went 200, 175, 150, 125. Maybe they'd stay there for a few weeks or months and stay at 1% for a while. And it just gradually went down as they continued to function normally, regardless of what their debt to GDP was. They were able to make all their payments. Yeah. And if you look at Argentina today, they've made all their payments. They haven't defaulted. 200% rates. Inflation going crazy. The currency going up by thousands of percent, going down by thousands. Can't go down, that's Trump, right? Collapsing. The number of pesos a dollar buys going up dramatically, right? It goes on. It doesn't default. There's no default risk. Turkey, 100% inflation, 100% interest rates for 15 years. There's no default risk. That got nothing to do with it. And so that was for Phil. How did I do? But anyway, that's in the 7 deadliness of fraud part. And anybody have any other questions about anything else? So I've come up with this thing about quantum mechanics. Any physicists in here? So the universe, how far back in time does it go? Well, with their models, it goes back infinitely in time. It's an infinite regression. Where else do we see that? The mainstream economist inflation understanding doesn't have a source of the price level. They don't understand the currencies of monopoly, and monopolists set price. And so, where do prices come from? Well, they can tell you, they've come up with a way to forecast how prices might change from this year to next year. We think they're going to go up 3%, and they'll give you all these reasons. One of them is inflation expectations, right? Which has been discredited because it doesn't work, but still that's one of their reasons that prices go up. So why did prices go up last year to this year? Well, it was one of those same things. Where did today's prices come from? Well, they came from last year's prices that went up or down based on these things. And what about the year before? Like, where did it start? They don't have a source of the price level. So they say the price level is historic. We start with this year and then we tell you where it's going to go. It's just an infinite regression. So they don't even have a source of the price level. I picked up a long time ago, back in '93, soft currency credit, that it's the prices government pays. You need the government's money to pay the tax. They tell you what you have to do to get it. That's where the value comes. If you don't like it, you're going to default on the tax and wind up in jail or whatever happens to you. Okay, it's monopoly 101. Everybody understands where a single supplier, you're the electric company, you tell the community it's 15 cents a kilowatt. They can't, sell electricity at the market. There's no competitors. There's a single supplier. You have to set a price. Might be the wrong price, have bad consequences, so then you have to set another price. Markets mean buyers and sellers on both sides. Okay? Currency is a monopoly. There's a single supplier of the thing you need to pay taxes. Well, they don't have that. Okay, so they don't have a beginning to their story. I have a beginning to the story. It's the money story. It begins when the government wants to provision itself. It wants soldiers, it wants sailors. How do we do that? We put a tax requirement, a tax liability on everybody. Okay, what does that do? Well, now they're all unemployed. They need the thing to pay the tax by pound. How are they going to get it? Oh, well, you serve in the Royal Navy. I'll give you $50,000 a year or whatever it is. And now we've got a system going. We've created a value. The rest of the markets can figure out the value. Do you want to be a sailor, or do you want to sell bread to these guys, or pizzas, or do something else? And you get monetized. But the story has a beginning and moves from the beginning. Physics doesn't have the beginning. So it's telling me there's a missing element of the story, the same way there's a missing element here, or the world really doesn't have a beginning, one or the other. Okay? The beginning is always the weakest force, because if you're weaker than the weakest force, you can't ever move. You've got to be a stronger force to move against, to be able to move. The weakest force is gravity. So I'm saying the force of gravity is a model assumption. It's the beginning. It's the initial information. In the beginning there was gravity, and then everything else is derived from that. All their other electromagnetic equations and everything else involve stronger forces that evolve from this one, just as a point of logic. So it's okay. What do I know about quantum physics? Right? So next month, in October, I get a thing from Italy. They're having a very important meeting at Lake Como. They'll pay my expenses, first time. Another first, third first this week. Travel, put me up at the hotel, all these Italian officials. And this is an important discussion of Europe right now and the fiscal policy and everything else. And we'd like you to be their keynote speaker and get in discussion with these guys so Europe can move forward. And so apart from what I think about Europe, one of the signers, one of the members of this group is multi, what do you call it?
Nationality?
Multidisciplinary.
What do you call it?
Multidisciplinary.
Yeah, multidisciplinary. This guy's senior physicist in CERN, in particle accelerators and physics and all this stuff. And so now I'm going to get to throw this by him and see what he says. I've never done it. I've never had a real physicist I could ask about this. I've had some students who thought it had merit, but I haven't come across a guy who's actually lead and running these top theoretical physics programs and quantum mechanics. So that'll be interesting. Keep you posted on that. So what can the European Union do? They are in absolutely primed to become world leaders, to be the most prosperous province in the world. They've learned do what it takes to prevent default is what the banking system needed. Deposit insurance at the national level doesn't work, but when you do that, it works. Okay, they got past that. They've learned from COVID that the deficit limit is a policy tool, not an absolute limit. We had COVID, so we let it go to 11% in Italy. Nothing bad happened except the economy did better, right? So they can use that now as a policy tool. So they haven't, it hasn't quite sunk in, but they've got all the data points from all these countries that had levels 2 and 3 times their limit, and they can see what happened, right? And so they've got everything they need to now use that as a policy tool and create a prosperous, full employment economy. They now have the United States out of the way, where Europe, if they understand things, can be the importer of the world the way the US was. They can step into that position if they recognize that it's okay to let your currency get strong, which it's starting to do. Okay, they're on the way to this extreme prosperity, and go ahead and allow a trade deficit, allow the rest of the world to send you reparations. They're right there. It's getting started. The first 10% has already moved. And they just have to maintain they have to have the understanding and maintain the fiscal balance to facilitate this instead of to fight it. In the past, they would have fought it. If they don't fight it, when you start importing more, just let your deficit levels run higher to accommodate the savings of the Chinese or whoever's the exporters. They want to save euros, fine. Let it go. And they have the tools to understand this, and they can take the places in world leadership if they just understand it. Yeah.
Where do you think that understanding is?
What's that?
Where do you think that understanding is? Because France has just come out and said they've got no money.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering where you think the commission
They
or bank or...
they're talking about Eurobonds, right? To fund all these military expenditures. They know that's deficit spending. So they're just like arguing around the edges of how they're going to do it. They can still say that for political purposes, but what's France's deficit, 4 or 5% now or something? Okay, it's way over the 3% limit. And so they're not saying we have to come back, but they can say things like that. But if you look at what they're actually doing rather than what they're saying, right now it's enough to sustain demand, and it's going to have to get higher. They're going to have the honor, the privilege of letting it go higher without inflationary pressures. And yeah, go ahead.
Yes, they said they're going to go back to the 3% deficit limit, but they're going to exclude the military.
Yeah.
But the 3%.
Yeah. And the next thing they'll do
is still valid, and they are going to make everybody go back to the 3%.
That's what they said, but as you know, talk is cheap, especially in Europe. But they might decide that the primary deficit has to be 3% or something.
Well, talk is cheap until you have the south of Europe industrializing and competing against the north, and then the north says not anymore. So talk is cheap until you confront the north of Europe with the south.
Okay, that's my quote in here. What if there were no hypotheticals? That's like maybe way down the road, right?
Oh no. So, Italy is still competing against industrially against the North. That's why we got the euro. So, so Italy is not anymore competing against the North. And in Spain, we used to have the same. Portugal, not very much, but Spain was industrializing, and this was a way to stop the industrialization of the South. And that is exactly what is going to happen.
Right, but, well, okay, you're saying that's going to happen, but it might happen. I agree it might happen. But what I'm saying is there's an opportunity here for everybody to grow, not just the South versus the North.
Everybody, who is everybody?
North and South.
Yeah, no, that is different countries with different interests.
Yeah.
And with different goals.
Okay.
The goal of a German person is not the goal of a Spanish person.
Yeah.
The goal of a Greek person is not the goal of a French person.
Yeah.
I mean, to say that there is a European demos is not understanding the European Union. There is not a European demos. There is not a European way of thinking, and the interests are totally contradictory.
Well, look, they told me that when Draghi came in and said, we'll do what it takes and guaranteed all this stuff. They said that same thing about it, but it happened because it had to, okay? And then the same thing was said before COVID. You know, these people can't do it. And all of a sudden, the limits are 3 times higher. So the political forces that drive people to want to make profits and to do well, you know, those forces are there too. Why is France not still at 4 or 5%, not back at 3?
Because they will be.
Well, I've heard that for 7 or 8 years. Okay, I'm not gonna, let's just, I'm not saying you're wrong, I just see the opportunity. I'm not saying it's gonna happen, because I don't want to get in that discussion, because I don't know. But this opportunity for extreme prosperity for everyone to grow the whole thing is there, like it's never been before, with the US pulling out of the role of absorbing $1.5 trillion worth of stuff. That's available now for everybody else. And it's a huge bonus, you know. It's like a positive supply shock for everybody. And Europe is poised to be the recipient, but it's going to, you know, I'm not saying there aren't barriers. You know, there are, that's that question. There are political barriers, I understand that.
I mean, we're running over time a bit, and I don't want to miss the train. But as you know, Warren's so good at this stuff that he'd keep you going all the time. But anyway, let's give Warren a round of applause.
So first of all, I'd like to say a big thank you to you all for actually coming to this event. It's lovely to see so many people, and also to have a lovely chat with people during the break. Special thanks to our speakers, as Phil has already said, and I'm sure you agree. Well, I know I've enjoyed this afternoon greatly, so thank you. This is where I say something about how we run our organisation. We're only small. We're a non-profit, and we rely on public donations to actually fund what we do. Basically, it's keeping the website functioning and any of the other legal requirements that have to be fulfilled as a company. I'd like to thank all those people who do already fund us. We're very grateful to people who do. But if any of you could help out with a small donation, it would be really appreciated. And you can find our donation page on our website. So all that said, all that remains for me to do is say thank you again for being here. It's been great, and wish you all a very safe journey home, wherever you go.